Welcome, everyone, to the Football Diehards DFS show. The regular season has completed, and we're into DFS playoff football. So Eric and I are going to be taking you through the entire six-game weekend slate, I guess. We got a Monday night game, too. But let's do some little odds and ends before we get down to business. And Eric, how you doing? And how was your Week 18 for DFS?
I'm doing well, and my Week 18 was actually pretty successful as well. I mentioned in a few different places that I was going to sort of lower my stakes and kind of play in some of the 20 maxes and the like. So wasn't a huge payday on the whole, but finished just a hair south of 4x. So always happy with that, especially in the crapshoot that is Week 18.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I had a good week too. We were talking off air before about Najee Harris. I had him in. It looked like it was bleak when he got a touchdown that wasn't a touchdown and then fumbled on the goal line. So I thought that was going to be a big old bust, but it turned out he was a good play. And I honestly don't remember what the rest of the lineup consisted of, but some good ones. I got about 91% of head-to-heads was a win, and all the double-ups, and I'd hit in a $50 single-entry GPP as well, my cash lineup. So it was a lucrative weekend. So we are going to go fourth today. The last couple of weeks we did position by position with the magnitude of the size of the slate, but we've got 6 games. So we're going to break them down game by game and kind of see what players we're targeting more heavily than others in both the cash and GPP consensus. Again, you can follow us both on Twitter all weekend. I'm at JAC3600. Eric is at Fantasy Nav. Oh, Eric, who wound up winning the Pros with Joes? With Gabby and Jordan, was it? Or Coop? Whoop, I think you're muted there, Eric. Maybe you're not muted. You back with us? Nope, not on my end.
I'll come right back.
Oh, there you go. There we go. There we go. We got you. Now you're frozen. Oh, I think you might have left. All right. Well, we're gonna deal with that as it comes. So as I was saying, we're gonna go through all six of the games, starting with the Saturday games tomorrow, where we have San Francisco and Seattle. I'll kind of take you through some of the spreads and the over-unders as we wait for Eric to come back in with us. Eric, you with us?
I believe so.
All right, we got you back. I don't know what that was all about, but that's good. So it left us in suspense there. I was trying to read your lips as to who won the Pros with Joes, but what was the outcome there?
Yeah, so we followed what became kind of the industry standard, which was basically no points for that Monday night game. So that left Gab Gowdy and her co-manager Justin as our champions. But in a very gracious gesture, they decided to split the fundraising pot with not only their charity, but the charity that Jordan was playing for as well. So they're playing for the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. Jordan is playing for St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. We are still raising money. proswithjoes.com/donate. I think there's another day or two left on that fundraiser. So going to divvy up the final pot for those two charities. But our champion by record is Gab Gowdy.
Well, outstanding. And that's congratulations, Gab. We're both fans of you. And that's a nice gesture. That really kind of speaks to what it's all about, right? So, I understand that it was sad and scary circumstances, but led to that. But we've discovered that, especially with Damar Hamlin's charity receiving $7 million in a matter of about 24 hours after what happened, that there are a lot of good people in this industry. So Eric, thanks for running that thing. I've been happy to be a part of it the last 2 years. Hopefully, looking forward to next year as well with it. But yeah, great job, and congrats, Gabby, and congrats to who was it again? It was Jordan or Koopa Fiasco?
Jordan Loop.
It's Jordan, right. Okay, so yeah, congrats to both of you, and congrats to your charities. Great performance on both ends there. Awesome. So, all right, we're going to move on here to our 6 games. We're going to start with the Saturday the 2 games Saturday. So we're going to kind of tackle this slate as a whole. There are a lot of split slates here. You can play the Saturday game by itself, the Saturday games by itself, the Sundays by themselves. All have showdowns. But we're going to kind of take this as if everyone's playing the full 6 games that stretch across the 3 days, which I myself am probably going to be doing. The majority of my entries is going to be that because I like there's a lot less variance you have to kind of account for in those kind of match, which as a cash game player suits me fine. All right, so our first game that we have on the docket is the 4:30 game on Saturday. We've got Seattle in San Francisco. San Francisco looks to be favored by 9.5 at the moment from what I'm looking at. At home against Seattle. 49ers have a team total of 26. The Seahawks have a team total of 16 and a half. So let's start with the 49ers here, and we'll start right at the top. Obviously Christian McCaffrey looks to be one of the top plays overall at any position on this slate. But I'm curious as to know where you're standing on him. If I'm looking at rostership projections right now, it looks like he is coming in at the 6th highest rostered running back. Am I even on the right slate here? Yes, I am. Okay, he's coming in on the 6th highest rostered running back on this slate, which is interesting to me because Seattle has been, a team to attack like all season, giving up the 2nd most fantasy points per game to running backs. You figure the game script favors McCaffrey if they're going to wind up being favored by almost 10 points in this one. I think what it is that's given people pause is the fact that in 3 games Christian McCaffrey has played with Eli Mitchell. Mitchell has had more carries than him. So I'm curious to know how you're approaching McCaffrey on this slate. I'm not playing him in cash. I prefer to dip down $1,000 to Saquon Barkley, who we'll talk about in that game soon. How are you treating the Christian McCaffrey and Eli Mitchell situation this week?
Yeah, I think as we get into the sort of ownership refresh tomorrow morning or getting closer to lock, we'll probably see that percentage walk up a good bit. I'm expecting Christian McCaffrey to be certainly one of the more popular running backs on the slate. He certainly carries one of the highest projections. Eli Mitchell is a limiting factor, but with the variety of ways that Kyle Shanahan gets him involved in the offense, gets CMC involved in the offense, I think he's got a lot of different ways to get there. I'll qualify this by saying that, this was an Eli Mitchell less week, but in week 15, when they faced off against Seattle, put up, almost 29 fantasy points. It was certainly in the top 5 in terms of DK scoring. So, the upside's absolutely there. This 6 gamer is just small enough to where raw points are going to be material, right? So I expect him to be relatively popular. I think 8.9K is probably about the high end of the price tag that I would be comfortable paying with Eli Mitchell in there. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be hard to find very many guys that can score, north of 20 points and have that be well represented on their projection, right? So I'll have him. I'll probably be certainly overweight if he's the 6th highest running back. I'll probably settle in right where the field does, just because you need those points.
Yeah, I agree with you too. I think that's a really good price tag for him. It's just cheap enough that he's not what you would expect from McCaffrey, but he's just expensive enough that it gives you a little bit of pause with Eli Mitchell's presence. How about Mitchell himself? You are a bit more of a multi-entry player than I am. Are you going to have some shares of Mitchell? He scored twice on 5 carries. He looked like he was raring to go in that game, and he's got the same positive matchup here.
Yeah, he's absolutely back into his kind of mid-season form. It's hard to say when mid-season was with Eli Mitchell, just given how much he was in and out of the lineup, but definitely appears to be healthy. And in this matchup against Seattle, this is the type of run defense where a limited number of carries can result in a pretty considerable fantasy output, right? So his projection isn't anywhere near that of Christian McCaffrey, obviously. But if he's going to be a fraction of the rostership that McCaffrey carries, he has a decent opportunity to score. There are certainly plenty of game flows where Seattle is trailing in this one, and San Francisco is salting away the clock, right? So definitely like getting to some Eli Mitchell shares, both for salary relief and for a little bit of leverage off of what I think will be a very popular Christian McCaffrey.
All right, so, yeah, that's going to be a fun one, and I think you put a point on it there that you're going to want to watch the rostership projections as they come in, because where McCaffrey lands is a good telling point to how you should play both of these guys. Moving on to the San Francisco passing game, so Deebo Samuel looks like he's going to be back. He's got not as much action with Brock Purdy as quarterback here. Brandon Ayuk is the leading target getter from Purdy, but it's Kittle that I'm really intrigued by here against Seattle, who's given up the most fantasy points per tight ends, and this past season, the two games against Seattle this year, Kittle has 4 touchdowns on 13 catches and 274 yards. So, yeah, he's not that expensive. He is the most expensive tight end on the slate. What's your take on Kittle here?
Yeah, I'm expecting George Kittle to be probably the most popular tight end in terms of rostership when it's all said and done. A lot of it has to do with just absolute tear that he's been on with Brock Purdy under center. And the thing that's really going to support that is the price tag, 6.1K. Granted it's high for a tight end, but he projects really well. Projects much more like a wide receiver 2, maybe kind of a fringe wide receiver 1, and you would happily pay 6.1 price tag for that type of production, right? So I think Kittle is going to be very popular, and I think he's in a spot to continue to produce, right? We've obviously seen the productivity with Kittle, and while Brock Purdy's under center, and this matchup against Seattle. Coming up against tight ends is very favorable as well, right? They're number 2 in terms of fantasy points allowed to the position. So it's got a great matchup. I think he's going to be popular. I think there's going to be a lot of San Francisco stacks as people try to front run and get out to an early lead.
Yeah, if you're in those things, it's tough to resist the allure sometimes of stacking the first game and seeing yourself winning $10,000 for an hour before it all goes to the wayside. Yeah. So the rest of the passing game here is interesting too. So real quick, I have the targets here since Brock Purdy has become the quarterback. And again, Deebo Samuel missed a good deal of time with this, so it can't really see the full spread of it, but Ayuk has 39 targets. McCaffrey and Kittle have 34 apiece. Then it's Jawan Jennings at 20, Deebo at 18, and then all the way down to Ray McLeod at 10. So, do you think that Ayuk's target share is a microcosm of Deebo not being there, or do you expect him to still kind of be the wide receiver 1 even with Deebo back?
Yeah, I think it's more so the former, right? This year with Deebo, I think we saw kind of the other side of this sort of offensive weapon role, right? Getting creative. It can certainly lead to some very high ceilings. It can also lead to some relatively low floors. So I don't think that it's as far of a gulf between these two players, Ayuk and Samuel, as many people projected heading into the season. But Deebo being back out there will absolutely eat into Ayuk's target share. So, we could see an outcome where Ayuk is still, the leader among those two in terms of target share, but I don't think it's going to be, quite as wide a gap as they, continue to integrate Samuel into this offense.
Yeah, I will say the one interesting thing to that note that I have there, and I'm looking down at the rostership projections here, and they both look to be pretty, unless I'm glossing over one of them. They both look to be pretty low owned with respect to the rest of the receivers on this slate, and Ayuk is less owned than Deebo Samuel. I'm assuming that is based on their almost identical prices and the fact that Deebo is technically supposed to be the wide receiver one there, plus with his rushing upside as well. But yeah, I kind of like that. With you mentioned the San Francisco stacks, having the two of them there maybe as a pivot off of the more popular Kittle and McCaffrey is an interesting way to go in this because Seattle has been soft against the pass too, and they can be had in the air. So yeah, I think we're kind of in agreement that Seattle is looking like it should be an eruption spot here. It's just a matter of how you tackle it. Before we get to the Seattle side, we're joined by some friends in the chat. Wendy Early, who's become a regular of ours. Welcome, Wendy. And Mr. Scampers, one of our favorites, and Mr. Football Diehard himself, Bob Harris, has joined us into chat that he doesn't like watching the Bunnies leave. So welcome in. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you have any questions, this does not have to be limited to DFS. This can be in your playoff leagues. I'm in a couple of those, elimination playoff leagues where you play a player and then can't use them again. Those are always fun strategies. So if you have any questions about those, feel free to post them. We'd love to help you out. The Seattle side. This is a little bit tougher against this defense. You figure that the game script favors the passing game here, as they should be playing from behind. But Geno Smith, in the 2 games against Seattle this year, has only passed for 1 touchdown and has averaged only 5.8 yards per pass attempt. So let's look at the passing game first here. Will you have any interest in this Seattle passing game at all? I mean, let's limit it to the Geno, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett thing because it's a pretty concentrated offense here in the passing game. Are you interested in any of these guys as a stack or maybe even as an individual one-off?
Yeah, I've got a fair amount of interest, right? This Seattle offense is funnels all of their passes to 2 players, right? So we always love to see that. And for all of the prowess of the San Francisco defense, it's really their front that is prolific, right? In their secondary and specifically in their individual matchups, they've got some soft spots in there. And a player like DK Metcalf is, perfectly primed to take advantage of that. Where he's lining up, he should see more of Lenore than anyone else. Lenore is allowing a 72% catch rate. He's giving up a good 35 pounds and a couple of inches in height, right? So DK Metcalf should be able to take advantage of that. And moreover than anything else, I think this is a game where Seattle trails. And I think that we're going to see, really all of these offensive pieces for Seattle be relatively under rostered, right? So you can get some leverage in a good game script with individual matchups that can be taken advantage of. I'm all about that, those sort of pillars in finding these one-off pieces.
I agree, and I think the way to use them is more so as a bring back to these San Francisco stacks we've talked about. I'm not really into loading up Geno and DK and Tyler Lockett in this game. I just don't think the upside is there. But you're right. I mean, and you look back at some of their lines this past year. Lockett actually had success in both games against San Francisco. He went for 9 for 107 and 7 for 68. DK Metcalf was kept quieter with a 4 for 35 and a 7 for 55 line. Neither one of them scored against San Francisco this year, but San Francisco has allowed the 8th most catches and the 7th most touchdowns to wide receivers, believe it or not, this year. And a lot of that's due to game script, but we should be looking at that the same way. So I agree with you. I really like those guys as one-offs. I'll mention on the tight end spectrum, if you're looking to play tight end roulette, that Colby Parkinson did out-snap Noah Fant last week. And that was in a must-win. So that's not it's a week 18 thing. Don't play anything into it. And over the last 2 regular season games, he has an 81% snap share and a 79% snap share. So again, it's a terrible matchup against tight ends, but I don't hate taking a shot on him as a super cheap tight end to help you load up on maybe other stacks. And then in those DFS showdowns where you pick, you play the 1-game showdowns, that's a really nice value there too. Before we get to, let's get to the running back first, then Wendy, we'll get to the question you have in there. So Kenneth Walker, let's talk about him before we move off this game. He has had no success against San Francisco. 3.6 yards per carry on only 16 carries for 57 yards. Are you interested in Walker at all? I have made several lineups so far, and I have no Walker, and I'm fine passing right over him right now.
Yeah, I don't love it. You mentioned 3.6 yards per carry. That's actually a relatively good day in the office against San Francisco. They're allowing 3.3 yards per carry to running backs. So
Fair point. Yeah,
he's
yeah.
doing incrementally better than most people playing San Francisco. The only thing that I'll sort of note here is kind of at the macro level. I think that this sort of middle class, this mid tier priced running back is generally going to be overlooked, and certainly Kenneth Walker will be in a very, very tough matchup. So if you're playing in a large field tournament, if you want to save some money and get a contrarian build out there to start the playoff slate, I mean, Kenneth Walker, he can certainly score a touchdown, right? And that's going to be, that has been sort of the story of the season for him. So it might be an interesting way to get very, very unique and a lot of leverage on the field early in this slate. But in terms of his projection and his range, I mean, it should be a down week for him, right? So really, only where I'm looking to get very cute is the circumstance by which I'm going out of my way to roster Kenneth Walker.
I agree. And just looking at early ownerships on him, or what we have, is looking like he is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, ninth highest rostered running back, behind pretty much everybody more expensive than him. And then also Jeff Wilson has coming in a little bit higher roster than Kenneth Walker. I do find it interesting. He's ahead of both Dallas running backs. And Devin Singletary in this game. So we can talk about that when we get to those matchups. But that strikes me as a little interesting on this slate, given the talent level of some of those guys and the matchup of some of the other ones. But Walker's in a little bit of a limbo for me. Okay, so just to kind of put a bow on this game, let's answer Wendy's question. She has a one and done question about this thing. And actually, this is a fun one because I was going over these things today. So the question is, in a one and done, would you feel okay playing Kittle this week? And again, just for people that aren't familiar, the one and done is you pick players, you pick a roster every week, anywhere from, I don't know, it's usually about 5 to 6, 7, 8 players. And then once you use them, you can't use them again. So in the couple that I was doing, I was pretty much between Hawkinson and Mark Andrews. I think the problem with Kittle is they're one of the most likely teams to win this weekend. So you don't want to blow it on Kittle if he's going to play next week and maybe even the week after. But I mean, the matchup is so good. Like, he's in such a good spot. I think I'd still say no, I wouldn't play him. Just because Hawkinson is in an equally good spot and murdered the Giants the last time they played. Andrews is the high target share, and they're likely to lose, so you can kind of use him and lose him. What's your take on that? I'm still going to say no on Kittle, but I mean that's a hard one to say no to. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd probably be inclined to pass as well. For me, the clear play in one and done at tight end this week is Mark Andrews. He has an elite role in the offense, like you laid out, and he has a very high likelihood of not being available for any of the subsequent weeks, right? Really, by hook or by crook, a lot of the premier tight ends in the league have made their way into the playoff tournament. So, I really want to try to position myself at that position in particular to have a Kelsey or a Goddard, available to me as we carry on down the path, a Kittle as well, right? So, there's going to be weeks where having one of these premier options at that position that has so much scarcity is going to give you a huge edge on the rest of the field. And I would much rather have that at my disposal later in the tournament than, burn it in the first week.
Yep. So I think we're in agreement on that one there, Wendy. Although Wendy did follow up with Evan Engram there too, with a question mark. We're about to talk about that game, so we can get into Engram in detail. He's still, I get it. He's still not one that I'm really interested in rostering as the tight end, with just some better options that to me that are in better situations. What about you on Ingram?
Yeah, I mean, he's someone to consider. Really, the question there is, who you think, comes out of this game with the Chargers as the victor. I like the Jaguars. Spoiler alert. So I like having Ingram in the holster for the divisional round.
There you go. This one's. I think of the 6 games, this one is the one I'm least sure about of who to pick the winner of. So I'm kind of playing this one a little bit carefully. But let's actually get into this game from a DFS perspective. So we got the night game tomorrow is Chargers at Jacksonville. This is a tight spread of 2 points. The Chargers are 2-point road favorites. We're looking at 47 over under, which is the second highest one, I believe, of the week. So starting with the Chargers here, the big news here is that Mike Williams has been diagnosed with, I think it was a hairline fracture, was it, in his back?
That's what I saw, yeah.
But again, that's going to keep him out, and that changes the complexity of this Chargers offense tremendously. Fortunately, we've seen that a lot this year, and we've seen how it goes. So for the passing game, I mean, you gotta like Herbert a lot this week. The Jaguars are a pass funnel defense, giving up the seventh most fantasy QB points. He is in my player pool for cash at quarterback, playing on the 6-game slate. He's probably third in it. I'm usually more inclined to go all the way up or all the way down, and those two being Josh Allen and Daniel Jones, who we'll get to. So I'm probably not going to do it, but I wouldn't argue it. And then Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen is a complete floor play now, especially with Williams back. So you don't have to worry about his meager average depth of target. He's averaging 7.5 receptions per game over the last 8, and that's with Mike Williams healthy in several of those games. So you got to really like Keenan Allen. So I think those two are the ones I'm looking at the most from a cash perspective here. But talk to me about the rest of the Chargers offense. And you can throw Eckler in this too if you want to kind of touch on it all.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of very safe kind of cash or floor plays that are on the board for these Chargers, right? Chief among them is Keenan Allen. I think Herbert is a relatively safe play overall, but I think his rostership is going to have him a little bit closer to the tournament line than the cash line. I think he's going to be generally overlooked, as most people are, either going to the short things or looking to pay down, as you laid out. For the rest of this offense, I mean, it gets a little interesting, right? It really becomes a matter of which of these tertiary receivers is going to be the one that pulls all of the rostership. I would imagine it's going to be Josh Palmer. If that's the case, from a tournament perspective, at least, DeAndre Carter is the clear pivot there. We'll see where these projections land ultimately. I like Palmer to have a bigger role filling in for Mike Williams than I do for Carter, but they both will be on the field a fair amount. They're both priced at a point where they can very much so, get to pay off that value. The thing with Palmer, he doesn't line up in the slot nearly as much as Carter does, right? So he's got far more snaps from the perimeter, which is very much of the role that Mike Williams is leaving behind. So, he's the one that's primed to step into that role. But if we're looking at, an order of magnitude of difference in their projected rostership, I'll certainly err on the side of DeAndre Carter, who will be on the field plenty himself.
Yeah, and I have just looking at their stat lines in weeks 12 and 13 when Mike Williams missed. Palmer went 5 for 56 on 7 targets and 7 for 60 on 11 targets, which is a nice little floor. And then Carter went 7 for 73 and a touchdown on 10 targets against the Cardinals, and then was shut down or not used as much against the Raiders, going 1 for 14 on 2 targets. So I think you laid it out there perfectly, and their stat lines back it up, that Palmer would be the kind of safe target earner, even behind Keenan Allen, and Carter is the clear pivot in GPP there. And to your point on Justin Herbert as well, you pretty much nailed it. It's looking, as far as rostership projections go right now, he's way down there.
Mm.
And it's looking like the masses are kind of doing what I said. They're either paying for Josh Allen at 7,900, and the rest are picking one of the quarterbacks in Vikings Giants. So that kind of leaves Justin Herbert in limbo with his $6,600 price tag, which I can understand. But I do think he has the potential to be the QB1 this week if this game shoots out like it's expected to. So let's look at the other side as well. Trevor Lawrence, if we're talking shootout here, you got to be looking at the other side as well. Um, I'm kind of curious on your take. I like ETN in this a lot. He is kind of the lone Jaguar that I'm going heavy on. Um, this Chargers defense has been a run funnel team all year, giving up over 5.5 yards per carry. ETN's box scores at the end of the year really shouldn't give you any pause to rostering him. The week 17 game was when they were kind of resting their guys anyway. He had a big game and then they sat him for the second half. And then week 18, the Tennessee has been shut down run defense all season long. So, he ran into a juggernaut there. This is not. This is a team you attack with running backs. So ETN is almost certainly going to be in my cash lineups. It's just a matter of how overweight I feel like being on him in GPPs at his price tag. So why don't you give me your thoughts on the GPP take on ETN, and then maybe how you're attacking the passing game for Jacksonville.
Yeah, I mean, ETN certainly needs to be in the player pool, cash or GPP. I kind of get the sense that he's going to be a little bit overlooked, right? And we're doing some of this off of intuition as we wait for these projections to update. I think Christian McCaffrey is going to be one of, if not the most popular running back on the board. And so immediately the inclination is going to be for one of the lower priced options to be his running mate, pun intended, as the second running back, right? So I think a lot of these kind of mid-tier running backs are going to be overlooked. That would include Travis Etienne. Really, almost wherever his rostership falls, I plan on being overweight to the field on that number. If he's going to be chalky, that will really just dictate sort of how I go about pairing him with other Jaguars, or how I go about, cobbling together my run back strategy. But, this is absolutely the smash spot for Travis Etienne. I'll keep my fingers crossed and hope that he's low owned. But, I think that he is very much so the best running back play on the board this week in terms of matchup and relative to points per dollar.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I'm pretty much pushing the chips in on this guy this week. So for the passing game, not as much resistance for the running game as the passing game has given us. The Chargers have given up the 12th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, 6th fewest to wide receivers. They've got all pros in the secondary there. What's your approach for the Jacksonville passing game in this one?
Yeah, I'm probably going to limit it to where I'm stacking either Trevor Lawrence with a pass catcher, Travis Etienne being one of them, of course, or looking for kind of individual run backs from Chargers stacks. You mentioned the defensive accolades of this team against the pass. Really, the one soft spot there is their defense against the tight end. They are merely about league average against the tight end, and specifically give up the second highest yards per reception. So Wendy was asking about Evan Ingram earlier. I think Ingram is a really interesting way to get into this passing game. In terms of the traditional wide receivers, Marvin Jones is on the field a lot, and he offers a ton of leverage and a way to differentiate. So he might be a player that I'm a little bit overweight on. And then of the two kind of primary receivers, I tend to lean on the Christian Kirk side. This defensive secondary is tough, but among their primary coverage cornerbacks, Kirk should see the most of Callahan. Callahan is far and away carrying the highest catch rate in their secondary, 74%. So it should be a pretty solid high volume day for Christian Kirk. Obviously, if this offense is humming overall, some of those catches will come in the red zone and potentially give them some scoring upside. So in the sort of Kirk versus Zay Jones, I'll lean on the Kirk side, but I kind of like going more to Evan Ingram and throwing a few darts with Marvin Jones.
All right, awesome. So there is Jacksonville and Seattle. Nope, not Seattle. Excuse me, the Chargers. So before we get into the Sunday games, we got a question in chat from Mr. Scampers. Any thoughts regarding the elevation of Tevin Coleman to the active roster for San Francisco? Will it carry 4 running backs since Jordan Mason is on the team, or do you think Mason gets scratched? I mean, I don't think. I mean, I'll answer this 2 ways. I don't think you need to worry about any running backs on that team but McCaffrey and Eli Mitchell. I believe that Tyrion Davis-Price would be the scratch. Unless there's some money thing that's in play for them elevating Coleman. I don't know the ins and outs of that. Maybe you do. What do you think of this?
I do not I do not know the ins and outs of if there's any sort of cap or money implications. Yeah, I mean, if I had to guess, I would say they're more likely to carry 3. But it's not unheard of for a coach to trot out 4. I'll walk down narrative street with how snake bit it feels like these 49ers are with regards to injuries to their running back room.
Yeah.
Maybe they just want to play it safe and have some extra depth out there, but that is merely reckless speculation.
Yeah. Yeah, so I wouldn't read too much into it then. All right, moving on to the Sunday games. This will probably be the quickest one because it's pretty one-sided. So we've got Miami at Buffalo. Buffalo is 14-point favorites currently at home against the Dolphins, who are starting Skylar Thompson with a 14.5 point team total. So let's quickly talk about the Dolphins here. You are more the GPP player, so you might be seeing something that I'm not. I have zero interest in the Dolphins offense here. I mean, obviously there's Tyreek Hill who can do it with anybody at quarterback, but it's even if he gets 14, 15 targets, I have to imagine that they're going to be such low quality targets. So you're basically gambling that he's going to turn a short pass into a 50-yard touchdown there for him. Obviously he's capable of doing that, but what's your thought there?
Yeah, I mean, he got a decent little haircut in terms of his average salary relative to his 7.9K this week. I mean, he is the epitome of a GPP dart throw, right? He absolutely can take one to the house anytime he gets the ball in his hand. He's had good games with backup quarterbacks in there or against tough matchups. So he'll be in the player pool, but he's really someone that I'm looking to get a ton of leverage with. I mean, I would be surprised if he ends up even flirting with 5% rostership, right? So he is one of those players where anytime that that rostership number is that low, it should at least be on your radar. But you're really looking for a 1 out of 1,000 outcome for him to really break the slate. So if you're max entering tournaments tomorrow or this weekend, he should have a spot or two amongst your pool. But really, this is going to be a tough day for the Dolphins offense overall. Skylar Thompson is obviously not anywhere near Teddy Bridgewater, who is an order of magnitude behind Tua Tags. So don't expect a whole lot from Miami's offense on this weekend slate.
Agreed. And I'll just point out too that I guess another play you can look at is Jeff Wilson. I mean, Raheem Mostert broke his thumb in week 18, so he should be on the field a lot. I don't know what that means for his production because the Bills are a strong rush defense, and the game script can't possibly be working in Wilson's favor in this one. But, I mean, if he stays on the field in obvious passing situations, I think you could get something out of him as well. People don't seem to be scared off at him. I mentioned before that he is ahead of Kenneth Walker when we mentioned him in projected rostership too, at 5,400. So I don't know. Maybe he's a fun GPP pivot off of a very chalky Leonard Fournette, who he'll talk about in the last game here. But I guess that's interesting. You got anything? You look like you started steam coming out of your ears on that one.
No steam. It'll boil down to projected rostership, right? But I think that Jeff Wilson's actually going to be kind of popular on this slate. Going back to my overarching theory that it's going to be McCaffrey and a pay down option. People are going to see him sitting there at 5.4K. He'll have the lion's share of the carries out of that backfield at his disposal. And you go back just a few weeks ago, Raheem Mostert was having a pretty solid day against Buffalo when Miami went up to Orchard Park in week 16, week 15. Got up over 100 total all-purpose yards on the day. Finished as running back 13, right? So, Buffalo's run defense isn't, the strength of their unit at all. And with that price tag and with Raheem Mostert being ruled out, I think Wilson might actually be kind of popular. So if that's the case, he's a pretty clear fade for me in the tournament context. But as is always the case, it's going to boil down to where that projected ownership falls.
Yep, for sure. All right, now we're going to play a game here. So I'm going to give you some stats, and then you're going to answer one question. Okay, so Josh Allen, 42 total touchdowns this year, passing and running. Nuked the Dolphins in both games he faced them this year for 704 yards total, 6 touchdowns, no picks, plus another 124 yards rushing. He's under 8,000, which he hasn't really been. I'm checking to see when the last time we saw that was, and I'm on the wrong slate here, so I'm not going to find Josh Allen. But I'll kind of answer that. But I don't think it's been a while since we've seen Josh Allen under 8,000. Okay, so simple question here. Is there any possible reason to be fading him in anything?
Price tag to an extent. It has been since week 8 since we've seen him under 8,000. So he's not overpriced by any means, right? But if you want to, find some salary relief at the position, there are guys on the board this week where you can do it. Game script, if this becomes nasty in a blowout, maybe that limits his upside. I tend to subscribe to if it becomes a blowout, probably has a lot to do with Josh Allen's play. So, his ability to get there in a half or 3/4 of play is probably among the strongest in the league, right? So, those are how those arguments go, but those aren't things that I'm necessarily subscribing to. I think that he's a very strong play on the 6-gamer.
Okay, so I'll answer my own question here. I won't just kind of leave you hanging to answer all the tough ones here. But from a cash perspective, I'll say the only reason to fade him for me is if you want the high price skill positions there. Okay, if you want McCaffrey, if you want Jefferson, if you want Barkley, you can't have Josh Allen. Okay, so it really comes down to a matter of where do you think the floor is better? To me, it's probably going to be from those skill position plays. I usually in cash don't spend up for quarterback unless I feel it's absolutely necessary. I don't tend to this week. Certainly, like you said, he's not overpriced. If the money is there and there are enough values that you could fit all those guys in, go for it, because I would stake a lot of money that he'll be the highest scoring quarterback on this slate. But as we pointed out, when you do have both quarterbacks in that Giants-Minnesota game who are facing situations where they should both beat a sub 6K price tag, that says something for fading Josh Allen in cash. So I would think that's the only kind of way I would do it. Okay, so question number 2, or game number 2 here. It's a 14-point favorites, the Bills are. So you figure game script favors the run at the end. If you were to pick a running back, who would it be between Singletary and Cook? Singletary is 5,500. James Cook is 4,800. Rostership projections right now look about even. So that's kind of off the table as far as that goes.
And when you say they look even, relatively low, right? kind of like in
Yep.
the 7
Yep.
to 8 range ish.
Actually, even
I would
looking like a
probably
little bit less than that right now. Even so, it's
oh
more about the four or
lovely.
5%, which is yeah.
I might talk myself into just fading the passing game for Buffalo
Mhm.
altogether. I would err on the side of Devin Singletary to answer your question specifically. It seems like he is a bit more involved when the Bills are leading and winning comfortably. James Cook looks to be involved a little bit more when they're passing, when they're in the hurry up, when they're in a 2-minute offense, right? So, that relatively small sample would have me leaning towards the Singletary side. Um, I guess to go back to your prior question, another reason to fade Josh Allen is not being in love with his pass catching options.
Mhm.
From a tournament context, I'm certainly not going to roll him out there naked. And while you can centralize, a very good half for the Bills on the arm and legs of Josh Allen, you're dividing that ball up when you talk about his pass catchers. So, I mean, if we're looking at either of these running backs in the low single digits, um, I might look to fade a lot of the passing game for Buffalo. This is weird to say out loud. We're going to get through this together.
Yeah, no, but it bears mentioning too because this sometimes the passing games you got to play a lot of lineups if you're going to maximize a passing stack, and the Bills fall into that category. They're not a condensed offense. That Diggs is obviously the wide receiver one, but they have Davis, they have McKenzie, they have Shakir. Cole Beasley is now sharing slot duties with those guys. They have John Brown. He caught a 42-yard touchdown pass in Week 18. I forgot that guy even existed. And then there's Dawson Knox as well. And Singletary has had bouts as a passing back too. And they drafted James Cook to be that. So I think you make a good point there. If you're single or three entering here, maybe the Bills passing game is not the optimal way to do it, because not only do you have to get the right stack, you got to pick it the right way. So, I mean, I think if you are going to stack Bills stacks, the best way to do that is to multi-enter, do Allen, Diggs, and then just kind of mix it all up with among those other guys. That's really the way, if you're going to find an optimal Bills stack, that's how you're going to get it done. All right, so moving on to the next game, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do here. We're gonna keep this like this. This is how everyone's going to see. This is how everyone's going to see the next game for the rest of this show. No, I can't do that. All right, so all right, Giants and Vikings. You're gonna have to save me from starting to like shout or spit or something like this in this game. I am ready for this game. Giants are in the playoffs. I'm so happy. We have a coaching staff that doesn't suck for the first time in a long time. Not only that, it looks to be the premier fantasy game on this slate from both teams' standpoints. We've got the Vikings are 3-point favorites at home, which indicates it's an even game. They have a 25.5 team total. Giants have a 22.5 game total of 48 is the highest on the slate. So let's start with the favored Vikings here. So who are in their losing effort are going to put up lots of fantasy points for us in some point. So let's start there. From a cash perspective here, I have no problem whatsoever spending, if you're going to spend on one player, saying that it's Justin Jefferson. Getting Adoree Jackson back, but he is still a little bit limited in practice. He's been out since week 11. He's absolutely going to help slow down Justin Jefferson if that's a possibility. But I mean, he went for 12, 133, and 1. He pretty much led the NFL again in all relevant stats here. He's well worth his price tag, right? I mean, what's the downside of Jefferson, if any?
I mean, it's limited, right? I think the only real argument against it is just alternatives, right? If you want to go to Diggs, if you want to go to Chase,
Right.
the other pay up options on this slate. That's really the only reason to move off of him. I expect him to be relatively popular. So, if you want to get, a little bit different in your builds, maybe coming in underweight on Justin Jefferson, but ultimately, I mean, even with Jackson back, right? Like we've seen Justin Jefferson just torch better matchups, torch double coverage. There really isn't anything that we've seen in the context of 2022 that has been able to effectively slow down Justin Jefferson. So, you're not going to find a solvent argument as to why he needs to be faded outright or anything along those lines.
Right. And I'd say it again, the same thing I said with Josh Allen. If you want Allen and McCaffrey or Allen and Barkley instead of him, then he probably doesn't fit. So it's kind of where your priority lies as far as the top options go for cash. Like you said, differentiating among those top receivers. The other one in cash, my favorite tight end of the week, you were on Andrews when we were talking about the one and dones. Hawkinson obliterated the Giants in week 16. 13 catches, 109 yards, and 2 touchdowns. They've had trouble over the middle all season long. Getting back Xavier McKinney helps with that as well. But, as the clear wide receiver too, I think he's worth paying a little bit extra for in cash as well if you can get there. If you can't, I wouldn't force it. But, since they acquired him from Detroit, Hawkinson is the tight end 3 in PPR. So I think he's a great play there. All right, so let's talk about your boy KJ Osborne. You've won some money from that guy over the last couple of weeks. Are you using him in this one?
Yeah, I think I will end up with a fair amount of Osborne, primarily in my cousin stacks, right? In terms of where he sits at that, that 4.5K price tag, there are some other kind of flex plays that I'll be probably rotating around before KJ Osborne as kind of a last guy in, but I do plan on building a fair number of Kirk Cousins stacks tomorrow, and KJ Osborne will certainly be a big part of that, right? We obviously saw that huge game against Indianapolis back in Week 15, but ever since then, his role in this offense looks to have expanded. He had Week 16 against these Giants. He only saw 4 targets, but he did have a red zone target. 7 targets the week after that. 6 targets in Week 18, playing that kind of bridge role that we talked about on the show. 117 yards receiving. So I do think that he is a part of this offense. He sees very favorable coverage looks with obviously Justin Jefferson, but also TJ Hawkinson just kind of having their way in defensive secondaries. So definitely like getting to some Osborne, specifically where I'm building around Kirk Cousins.
Yes, and with Cousins, obviously that he's clearly in the cash conversation at quarterback. You mentioned the GPP. I mean, Viking stacks are fantastic in this one, and you said there's clear ways to do it, and even to get away from just Cousins Jefferson's things, which will be very popular. I will say for Cousins that they did lose their right tackle, which hopefully helps the Giants, but does is I guess a minor concern for Cousins off the edge there. They get their center back, and they have one of the best left tackles in the game. So I think Cousins is fine in cash at 5,900. Before we get to the Giants, talk to me about Dalvin Cook. He is not someone I'm finding myself on a lot in these builds, which probably means I'm missing something from a GPP perspective. Are you on Cook in this one?
To an extent, he sort of falls into that middle tier that I think will largely be overlooked, right? Mm-hmm. So definitely like him, potentially as part of my cousin stacks, sort of as a secondary approach to that, but certainly in the pool where I'm stacking Giants and building around Danny Dimes. So definitely think that he'll be relatively overlooked. He obviously has a very large role in this offense. So, if we think that this game is going to score up, which I tend to think, Dalvin Cook has a good chance to get into the end zone and certainly has a large role to play. So if he's not going to be popular, I'll definitely look to come in overweight.
Awesome. Yes. So, and what is his price? I'm just kind of looking. 7,000. I'm just kind of looking where he falls. Yeah, it's looking like he's in that same range that we mentioned with Walker and Jeff Wilson, which is kind of below that top tier of like the highest roster, the highest price running back. So that's a good GPP play, like you said, especially in Giant stacks. Okay, so let's get to the Giants. I'm going to kind of take us around the various plays here because most of the Giants, based on matchup and price tag, are going to be among the highest rostered players on this slate, which terrifies me to an extent. But Daniel Jones at 5,600 is perfectly fine to use. The last time they played Minnesota, he passed for 334 yards. He had 42 pass attempts, which was the second highest he had all year. The other being against another pass funnel team in Detroit. Barkley is the entire offense on the ground too, and he had 133 yards and a score in their first meeting. He had 22 touches and 10 targets in that game. So I mean, you can fire him up with confidence in cash, even alongside Daniel Jones. And then the cheap receivers here, I expect they're going to be largely popular. What I'm looking at now is that Richie James is coming in as the highest rostered wide receiver on this slate, and Isaiah Hodgins is fourth. I wrote in the cash article that for football diehards that I would not leave a cash lineup without having one of these guys, just because they allow you so much flexibility to spend at the other positions. And either one is fine. Richie James has 32 targets over the last 4 games out of the slot. Hodgins had 12 targets against the Vikings the last time, went 8 for 89 and 1. Minnesota allows the second most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. I don't know that I'd play both of them. I don't think this offense sustains enough upside, even in this matchup, to have an optimal lineup where they both hit their ceiling at the same time. But I think, if you feel different, I'm going to get to you in a second about your GPP take on this Giants team, especially with the high rosterships. But I do think you should build your cash with one of those guys, and whichever one kind of fits your builds better is the way to go. So GPP, how are you approaching this Giants team from a tournament perspective with all the high rostership projections out there?
Yeah, so there's a few things in play. First and foremost, with Saquon sitting at 7.9K, I don't think there are going to be a whole lot of people that are going to roster him, right? I think people that are paying that, in that range of price tag are going to be more inclined to go to an Eckler or to a CMC. So I think that's going to depress his rostership a little bit. In tournaments, stacking a quarterback and a running back is always going to be is always going to offer some leverage relative to a quarterback and a sort of traditional pass catcher. So I like pairing those two up. But really, the tournament answer, it lies in what you have not said, right? You're talking about Isaiah Hodgins, you're talking about Richie James and how involved they are in this offense recently. And there's old Darius Slayton not getting any attention, running deep routes down the field left and right. Obviously he's not having his 10 target games of kind of the middle of the season, as we've seen Hodgins, as we've seen Richie James emerge more in this offense. But he's still very much so getting high leverage opportunities. He's getting a lot of looks downfield, and this is exactly the type of matchup that a player like Slayton can take full advantage of, right? So very much so seems like he would be the priority in terms of the GPP context, but that doesn't take away from Hodgins or James, right? They are very, very safe plays, especially at their price tag. And all of this is to say, I like Danny Dimes a lot on this slate, right? The knock against him throughout this season has been it's really hard to find reliable stacking partners to go with him. And now all of a sudden we have a plethora of them, right? We have a difficult decision as to make as to which one to stack him with. So, now that we've got some options that are reliably involved in this offense, really like building around Daniel Jones this weekend.
I love it, and I'll throw the other one out there too. What do you think of Daniel Bellinger? I've been back and forth on him. I'm not in love with any of the cheap tight ends really this week. I'm probably going to wind up spending a little bit more than I normally do. but he is clearly the primary tight end, and he runs the most routes. So, are you going to be using him at all in this one?
I mean, potentially as a tertiary piece
Mm-hmm.
in giant stacks, right? But sort of in a vacuum, there are cheaper options that I like more than him. Parkinson, you mentioned earlier, but also there are guys that are just a few $100s more that maybe not their role in the offense is markedly larger, but the tight ends role in the respective offense is a bit more involved, right? So not a whole lot to like on paper, but if you're looking for a third piece in an overload giant stack,
Mm-hmm.
Bellinger will be in rotation.
I think he fits in the showdowns too. I mean, he
He does.
4 of their last 5 games, he's played over 90% of snaps. So there's that. That for tight ends, that doesn't necessarily translate to targets because he blocks as well. But it does bear mentioning if you're on the field, you always have the opportunity to score. All right, awesome. So we nailed that down. We got about 15 minutes left and 2 more games to get to. So let's move on from the Giants' pending win against Minnesota and go on to Baltimore at Cincinnati. This looks to be another blowout on paper. I don't think it's going to be as much as it's played out to be. But again, we have a very low team total with the Ravens, only 14.5, which is the same as Miami against Buffalo, which is really disrespecting the Ravens a little bit in this one. Lamar Jackson is not ready, but it does look like Tyler Huntley is going to play after missing week 18. That will be one to watch. So I guess we can start with the underdog here first. You mentioned Mark Andrews early on in this one as somebody that you're looking to get exposure to. What about other people on the Ravens offense? As a cash player, this is not where I'm going. So what about from a GPP perspective for Baltimore?
Yeah, it really starts and pretty much stops with Mark Andrews, right? That slump down the stretch run of the season. Mark Andrews' role largely remained the same. It just he wasn't hauling those passes in anywhere near as frequently as we've grown accustomed to. Sort of shook that off in week 17, 9 for 9 for an even 100 yards. He's certainly the most appealing target among Ravens players. The other name that I'll mention, Gus Edwards, is going to be healthy. I expect him to have a pretty decent role in this offense overall. He really feels like he fits into another somewhat popular kind of pay down option at running back to kind of counterbalance the pay ups of Austin Eckler and Christian McCaffrey. So I think that he'll draw some ownership when it's all said and done. He's not someone that I'm going out of my way to roster. 14 points is a disrespectful team total for this team, but I don't think that they get much higher than that against a very much so improving Cincinnati defense.
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember when we did the show about I don't know, it's 6 whenever Lamar Jackson went down and Tyler Huntley was starting, and I was all gung ho on playing that guy, and you kind of explained all the things as to why I shouldn't. I mean, he's really not that good, is he? It's there's a reason, he's been called like Lamar Jackson light, and why they'd be possibly ready to let him leave in free agency and whatnot. But man, I mean, 5 games, he's got 2 touchdown passes. And even on the ground, he's not doing anything with 27 rushing yards. I mean, I get that he's got injuries to his throwing shoulder and wrist, but still, I mean, I thought I was wrong about that guy. I thought he was better than he is. So I mean, I guess you can fire up the Cincinnati defense in this one too if you're going for that kind of blowout here. But let's look at the Cincinnati side of things here. Bengals look good on paper, but I will point out some issues that they're already down La'el Collins, who's on IR, and they lost their right guard Kappa to a high ankle sprain last week as well. So offensive line issues. Now, that bears mentioning that the Bengals had a terrible offensive line last year and still succeeded beyond their wildest beliefs. So I'm not fading them based on that, but it is worth mentioning. And I do think the Baltimore defense is a really fun contrarian GPP play to throw in there, especially at their ownerships, which it looks like it's going to be one of the least owned defenses. They were sixth in the league in adjusted sack rates, and Burrow has actually had two bad games against them this year. So let's talk about the Cincinnati offense, though. Jamar Chase, you're playing him, right?
Yeah, I absolutely am. His role in this offense is prolific. We've obviously seen what he can do really since returning from injury a few weeks back. In terms of his his alignment, he should see a bit more of Humphreys than he does Marcus Peters. Over the last few weeks, that's been incrementally the more favorable matchup. The secondary for the Ravens has started to clamp down a little bit more, down the stretch. But ultimately, these types of athletes, in an offense that's designed to showcase what they do best, the quarterback where he has fantastic rapport. I mean, that's the type of player that needs to be in your player pool, and it's so frustrating. You mentioned the offensive line injuries, like. I felt like this was the year where Cincinnati really invested in that area, and we were going to see clean pockets and ample time to let routes develop. And now we're back to last year's playoff run, but they did quite well for themselves in that one. So a bit of a bummer, but I still think Cincinnati will be able to move the ball pretty comfortably this weekend.
I would tend to agree. Let's talk about T. Higgins real quick. He has no data against this Baltimore roster. Really, no, that's not true at all. He one game he doesn't, so he only played 10 snaps, and then he got hurt earlier on in the year. Last week he was a bust with one catch for 7 yards. He did get 7 targets though. How are you feeling? What's your temperature check about T. Higgins right now? As you're saying this, I'm kind of scrolling down here, and it's looking like he has almost no ownership at 6,500, which I guess you gotta give a look to of someone of his talent. What's your Higgins take there?
Yeah, that's absolutely it, right? I wouldn't be surprised if he's in the low single digits in terms of ownership this weekend, and a player of his caliber that's going to be on very few rosters is someone that is going to be interesting, right? Pretty much everything I said about Jamar Chase, you can pile on similar accolades for T. Higgins. Maybe not the same rapport argument, but he's certainly been in this offense and with Joe Burrow long enough to where even that is limited, right? And if you're gonna have to scroll down the page for a few seconds at a time to find where he ranks in rostership, he's going to offer some leverage.
Yeah, and just some names that he's below right now. He's below Adam Thielen. He's below Demarcus Robinson. He's below his teammate Tyler Boyd. I mean, man, if that holds, that's someone that you got to be putting in GPPs at that level of rostership, right? Like that's we're looking at a little under 4% right now on a 6-game slate.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Like we're usually having to go go slop around in the mud for fourth or fifth receivers to try to get different in these small slates. So to get someone who is regarded as a second receiver but is really more of a 1B type player and get that type of leverage, it's going to be critical to really laddering up if you're trying to take down a tournament.
Yep. So keep that name definitely kind of bolded in your GPP pool if that's gonna remain like that. All right. So for our final game of the night, we have the Monday night game, Tampa Bay at Dallas, or is it in Tampa Bay? No. What do they do? Why am I all of a sudden forgetting?
It is in Tampa
they
Bay.
Reseed and
yeah,
in Tampa Bay, right? Because they're the division winner. Okay. I was thinking because Dallas had such a better record there. So, all right. So Dallas in Tampa Bay. Um, from I'll let you kind of take the lead on the Tampa Bay passing game here because you can probably shed some better light on how to approach this a little bit better. But it's looking like Leonard Fournette at 5,300 is one of the highest rostered running backs on the slate right now. It looks he kind of retook the lead back a little bit. I mean, Rashad White was still there a lot more than he was in the in the early part of the year. But over the last 3 weeks, not counting week 18, with the starters sat most of it, Fournette had 57 touches and White had 39. I am concerned here with playing Fournette, even at that high rostership. The Cowboys defense are getting back Leighton Vander Esch, which really, really, really helps their run defense. And then, White is still there. There's no script that says Fournette is all of a sudden the lead back again. I think they'll lean on him in the playoff game a little bit more than they do White, but White is still there. So what's your take on Fournette, first and foremost, at 5,300? I mean, it's such a nice price. I might just wind up eating it in cash, but I do have concerns about it.
Yeah, I think the way you laid it out is really the way to think about it, right? His price tag is going to make him fairly popular for this weekend slate. Not to sound like a broken record, but he will offset that that low 5K price point offsets the 9K or so you're paying up for one of the premier options, and it really does look like he's reestablished himself as the primary runner in this offense, right? It felt like towards that kind of week 7 or 8 window, it was a little bit more Rashad White week over week, and then really down the stretch run, we're seeing him get back into double digit carries, left and right. We're seeing him get more and more red zone work. We're still seeing him involved in the passing downs. His ability in pass pro is still a good deal better than that of Rashad White. So I think that is ultimately what is going to keep him on the field more often. And with Tom Brady, if you're on the field, if you're able to, pick up a block or, maybe leak out of the backfield for an extra target or two, that's material. So I think he's a fine play. The things that you laid out are really more limiting factors to his upside, but in the low 5K price range, you don't need a whole lot of upside for him to be
right.
A very good play.
Yeah, and like you said, that and pass pro is a good point too, because especially against this Dallas team that has the third most sacks and has a really fierce pass rush. There's still pass protection concerns with their center, whose name is escaping me right now, is battling an injury. They're down to backup left tackles at this point in the season. So I think that pass protection says a lot in the playoffs here for sure, with Brady under center. Talk to me about their passing game here. They have all of them healthy. The Evans, Godwin, Gage, and Jones are all going to play in this one. So, I mean, is this one of the ways we kind of treat it, like I said, with the Bills, where you just multi-enter? If you're kind of ranking them, who you're looking at more often than not in this one, who are you looking at for the receiving game here?
So in the tournament context, I'm probably leaning on the side of Mike Evans more than any of the rest. I'll probably have a couple of Brady builds out there, so I'll look to probably get 2 pass catchers into my rosters when that's the case. But from a tournament or a GPP context, this actually sounds kind of inverse, but stick with me. Mike Evans is going to see the most of Trevon Diggs out of his defensive alignments. That's a very tough matchup on its face, but also Diggs is a bit of a ball hawk, right? He goes and tries to make the interception. He tries to make the big play, and Mike Evans is the type of player that can take advantage of that, right? That reputation precedes Trevon Diggs, and Tom Brady is the type of player that can work around that or even use that to his advantage. So it's very much so boom or bust. I don't think we're going to see the highest volume day for Mike Evans, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see him get behind Trevon Diggs a couple of times on Monday night, and that type of ceiling is really hard to come by, especially in the context of a sub 7K price tag.
Yeah, I was going to say the price tag there is really, really friendly on him. And Dallas has given up actually the most touchdowns to wide receivers this year, which kind of plays to your point where, going for that big interception play, if you miss it, that's, that's six for the other
A lot
team.
of
So I
green
like
out
that
there.
call a lot. Yep, absolutely. Okay, so the Dallas side, let's wrap this up with the Dallas side here before we sign off. We'll start with the passing game there because it's a little bit more obvious. Tampa's secondary is worse than their run defense. So Dak, CeeDee Lamb seems obvious here. What's other ways you're kind of approaching the Dallas passing game, if at all?
Yeah, so the secondary option there for me would be Dalton Schultz.
For sure.
He's really been neck and neck with TJ Hawkinson in terms of sort of second half tight end
Yep.
superstars, right?
Yep.
He's very, very, very highly involved in this offense. Tampa Bay, this isn't quite the Bucs defense that we saw last year. They're still proportionally more difficult against the run than they are against the pass, and they're even more favorable against the tight end specifically, right? Seventh most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. So I think Schultz has himself a fairly solid role and a lot of involvement in this game plan for Monday night. After that, you're really throwing darts, right? Noah Brown, is involved enough. Gallup will be out there. Really, the only circumstance by which I'm considering those guys is where I've got Dak in at quarterback, and I'm looking for kind of ancillary pieces. But it's pretty clearly rotating between CeeDee Lamb and Dalton Schultz among their pass catchers.
I agree, and just the point on Lamb too is 51% slot snaps. That'll keep him away from Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis a lot more. So I like that too. And then Schultz would fall into a similar category. So over the middle is where you'd want to attack this Tampa Bay defense. So yeah, that's the two I'm going with as well. And just to finish up Dallas here, the running game. We mentioned earlier in the show that both Dallas running backs are showing very little rostership right now, which is honestly not surprising given some of the staff that Tampa Bay has in the middle on their run defense. I am interested in Tony Pollard in this one, just more for the fact that he has that explosiveness on the edge, and all Zeke can do is run between the tackles, and he's just going to hit Akeem Hicks and Vita Vea all day long. I mean, I can see this being like a 10-carry, 17-yard game for Zeke, whereas I do see upside for Pollard in this, even in, on paper, a tough matchup. I will probably have 0% Zeke in GPPs, but I am fair to mix in a little bit of Pollard where I can. What about you?
Yeah, I'm actually favorable to both. I mentioned when we were talking about the receiving game that this isn't the Bucs defense of old. Mm-hmm. They're still proportionally strong and weak in similar areas, but they're not as stout against the run, right? Since week 12, Tampa Bay has given up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. So it's still their area of strength, but it's not the brick wall that they once were. Kind of like we were talking about with T. Higgins, if Ezekiel Elliott is going to be generally overlooked, that's probably someone that is going to catch my attention or pique my interest in the tournament context. And your Pollard play is spot on, right? Even if we do see Tampa Bay kind of clamp things down a little bit more in their run front, the player that can get out to the perimeter, the player that can take one carry and break a tackle and get some chunk yardage is going to be appealing as well. But I'm kind of surprised with where specifically Pollard's projected ownership is landing. If it stays low, then I'll want to be overweight there. But I think we see him kind of push into that kind of top 4 or 5 range in terms of rostership when it's all said and done. And if Zeke's getting overlooked, I'll happily roster him, right? This is a Dallas team that's running the ball more than 30 times a game, almost 32 times a game. So even if they're splitting carries, they've got path to mid-teens, high-teens touches in every game, and on a 6-gamer, if he's single-digit rostership, sign me up.
So I'll throw one question at you before we sign off here on that note, since you said it. So right now it's looking like Pollard is sitting in that high single-digit percentage, and Zeke is in the low single-digit percentage. It looks like he is slightly higher rostered than Devin Singletary and Elijah Mitchell. So if you're fitting in a last piece there, how would maybe you rank those guys? If it's game script or if you're stacking whatever, no correlation, it's just the last piece and price doesn't matter. How would you stick? Who would you stick in there as that last piece of those guys?
Based on those projections, I would probably go Singletary, Elliott, and then Mitchell.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well.
I am suspicious as to whether or not those projections hold. These projections move a lot, day to day or even hour to hour. I think most specifically that sounds about right for Zeke and for Mitchell. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see Singletary's rostership, really jump up by the time that lineup's locked tomorrow.
Yep. So I think that's one point as we sign off here that we can definitely impart. Make sure you pay very, very close attention to ownership trends as this game goes along, especially with a 6-gamer on tap instead of the typical, 10 to 13 games that we're used to seeing. Because that will really tell the tale about how you round out your lineups and put the stacks into play. All right. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us on this Wildcard weekend edition of the Football Diehards DFS show. We will be back with you next week for the divisional round, where we're going to have some new matchups to unfold. So please join us. That's probably, I don't know what the schedule is for next week as well, but what should be, is it Saturday and Sunday again, usually, for those kind of things?
I believe it is, yeah.
Eric, yeah. So we should probably be back with you on the Friday night again, but we'll talk about it and we'll tweet it. In the meantime, you can follow us both on Twitter. I am at JAC3600. Eric is at FantasyNav. We're always available for questions on there. And good luck and enjoy the playoffs this weekend. We're finally here, and it's looking like some fun games. All right, so we are going to sign